the presenters, and keep your microphones on mute when not speaking. Give a second or two just to double check to make sure we have all of our main panelists on board. Okay, I see everyone. We now move on to session 3. In this session, we will be discussing how green infrastructure proposals could attract the growing sector of green finance and become more bankable, and as well as what are some of the practical steps to attract green finance. So let me now give the floor to Mr. Eric Reuter, Network Coordinator of the Investment and Enterprise Development, to moderate this session. Mr. Reuter, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And so far, it's just been a wonderful meeting. I'm really absorbing as much as I can. So now I'm very excited about this session. And session 3 is attracting green finance for infrastructure. So, infrastructure projects face a number of challenges in accessing private financing. Thus, greener infrastructure proposals could attract the growing sector of green finance and become more bankable. So the focus question for panelists are, what are some practical steps to attract green finance? But before that, I'm very honored and very thankful to announce that we have our keynote remark starting here, as Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy is actually in London, so it's actually only 7:40 in the morning where he is, so we didn't want to have him giving a keynote address at like 5 o'clock. So Dr. Indrajit, he is the former governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, and he has 40 years experience in policy making and providing economic advisory service on both macro and structural issues at national and intergovernmental levels. He started his career at the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, and as well, he was seconded in the Ministry of Finance and Planning, and he was employed by the Commonwealth Secretariat from 1989 to 2008. And I should note also that he was an avid cricket player. So Dr. Indrajit, the floor is now yours.
Dr. Indrajit, you are on mute. Sorry.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Let me begin by thanking ESCAP, and its partners for inviting me to participate in this very timely and important event. It has the great virtue of country representative actually presenting specific projects for which they're seeking to mobilize funding. The meeting is therefore geared to produce practical outcomes. And this, the 6th meeting of this network, is very timely for a number of reasons. One, many emerging markets, and particularly developing economies, have a very large backlog, as all of you know, or catch up in infrastructure investment. This audience will be very familiar with the eye-watering numbers at both the national and regional levels. The developing economies in particular faced fiscal constraints even before the pandemic. These challenges have been amplified as a result of the effects of the pandemic. Though the fiscal support provided to families and businesses in these countries has been significantly smaller than in advanced countries, it is still, nevertheless, it has strained public finances. The budgetary deficit and public debt dynamics have deteriorated in many developing economies. This has increased the importance of PPPs or even well-regulated direct FDI in infrastructure. There will have to be a conscious pivot from reliance on debt to more reliance on equity. The perceptible, and in some areas of the world, dramatic increase in the frequency and intensity of extreme climate events, combined with the greater global realization ex post COP26 that very urgent and decisive action is required on multiple fronts to keep the 1.5% temperature increase target as a possibility, have made it even more important that sustainability is mainstreamed into the planning and budgeting for infrastructure development. This is the second reason that I'm putting forward for the contention that the premium attached to attracting green finance for infrastructure development has increased in recent times. The third overarching compulsion is the need to pursue vigorously the SDG 30 agenda. So the case for attracting green finance for infrastructure has been made materially stronger following the pandemic and COP26. Another global theme which is having an impact on the need to increase our focus on mobilizing investment in infrastructure is digitalization and the rollout of the fourth industrial revolution. If countries are to participate in the significant productivity gains that are being generated through these trends, the investment in broadband and other enabling infrastructure needs to be accelerated and it needs to be done in a sustainable way. We are already seeing some positive developments which need to be sustained and built upon. COP26 reaffirmed the commitment in the Paris Declaration to the transfer of $100 billion as green financing. As you all know, the delivery has been extremely poor so far. One needs to hope for more genuine commitment in the future. However, it's very clear that more needs to be done. And here, one can be cautiously optimistic about the trillions of US dollars of private financing becoming available for green investment as the corporate sector becomes more committed to the net zero target. Green banking, green debt markets, green structured funds, community-based green funds, and carbon market initiatives are all instruments which have emerged under the green finance theme. These need to gain greater momentum. The issuance of sustainable debt, including green bonds, has now crossed the USD 1 trillion mark. The challenge is to make these instruments, or a customized form of them, work in emerging markets and particularly developing economies. Priority needs to be attached to integrate sustainability factors into the portfolio management of all categories of financial institutions in our countries. One also needs to develop a commonly agreed taxonomy or disclosure framework to enable national authorities to impose appropriate country-specific rules and to monitor performance. Initiatives are also required to transition business models and operations to prioritize a low-carbon economy. In this connection, one can identify the following focus areas for green financing, including PPPs. 1, reducing emissions and environmental impacts by promoting renewable energy generation, energy efficiency, and grid services. 2, reducing negative environmental impacts by shifting the modes of transport and increasing per-trip efficiency through electric vehicles, connected services, autonomous driving, and most importantly for developing countries, public transport development. The other modes are probably going to take some time to come to our countries, but clearly in the short run, we can attach a greater priority to the development of our public transport. On agriculture, starting with production and moving through storage, processing, and distribution, there are opportunities for green investment. For a number of countries, investment to reduce post-harvest losses would yield extremely high returns. In Sri Lanka, post-harvest losses are estimated at between 35 and 40%. So clearly there's much that can be gained by putting in investment into reducing post-harvest infrastructure and doing so in a sustainable way. The next point next focus area I'd like to identify is promoting sustainable production and consumption in our societies and managing waste responsibly. Finally, on ecosystem services, monetizing the value of forests, water, and biodiversity through contributing to the sustainable management of natural resources is another area that requires priority. So these are the possible focus areas. One important point I'd like to make at this time is that when it comes to PPPs, it's important that there's genuine risk sharing and that all the risk is not transferred to the public entity and usually done through pricing policy. So we need to be cautious. This was one of the early lessons that one learned from PPPs. And so there needs to be genuine risk sharing going forward. Green financing also needs to be mobilized to harness markets, deepen capabilities, and drive innovation to support the transition to an inclusive low-carbon economy. Infrastructure development has to be at the heart of this. and the multilateral financial institutions can play an important role through credit enhancement mechanisms, guarantees, and other instruments of that nature. Let me end by sharing with you some highlights or some really an outline of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka's roadmap for sustainable financing. This was a very collaborative effort that the central bank led. It involved the government, civil society, obviously the financial sector, and it was a fairly long and detailed exercise. And we also obtained the support of various international platforms, and particularly the support of the IFC and UNDP. So what were the three objectives of the roadmap? One, bringing policy cohesiveness across ministries, the central bank, other financial regulators, and all financial sector participants to address specific ESG issues. Two, enhancing the resilience of financial institutions and enabling them to grow and develop in a sustainable manner through effective ESG risk management. Three, facilitating innovation in green finance products and services to mobilize predominantly private capital for sustainable investment, making available the financial resources for Sri Lanka to achieve the SDGs. And there are also 7 strategic activities identified in the roadmap. And these are: 1, there is a financing vision that identifies investment needs in 8 priority areas: agriculture and food, education, energy, health, marine resources, transport, urban development and physical planning, and water. Those are the 8 priority areas. So that is the financing vision, to find investment, green investment in these sectors. A second strategic activity involves the integration into the financial market of these kinds of processes. And tools have been identified in the roadmap to strengthen ESG disclosures and mainstream ESG issues throughout the risk management and decision-making processes of financial institutions. Third, financial inclusion. This particular roadmap on green financing is intended to be implemented side by side with the National Financial Inclusion Strategy. 4, capacity building. Technical expertise needs to be built to assess the viability of rapidly evolving green instruments and techniques. And so there is capacity building required in that area. 5th, public awareness raising, a public awareness raising program to increase demand for sustainable finance products, to increase awareness of the availability of such products and what these products can do, both within the financial institutions and the general public. And 6, international cooperation. And the roadmap envisages leveraging international collaborative platforms or knowledge sharing and capacity building platforms, which will be utilized to gain expertise, and B, build public awareness. 7, to develop a clear taxonomy to identify sustainable projects, allocate capital for them, and to measure performance. The roadmap also has a detailed action plan for all stakeholders with specific timelines for each action. If all segments of the formal financial and capital market sector, it covers all segments of the financial and capital market sector, as well as key shareholders within them. And this roadmap is available on the website of the central bank, which is cbsl.gov.lk. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Indrajit. It's very interesting, very all-encompassing, from realizing that we need to be more reliant on equity now, and also noting COP26, which is very timely, because yes, infrastructure needs to be more sustainable, and it's not just being green, but also being resilient to climate change. adverse weather and so forth. So it's very important to highlight that issue. And then also sharing Sri Lanka's ESG policy roadmap. And I would encourage everyone to view that link, because that's a very valuable information. And that's what makes ESCAP so good, is that we're able to bring in all this different information from different stakeholders. So with that, let me move to our next speaker, Mr. Ruizao Chen, or you can call him Francis. He's a CFA, a Green Finance Senior Manager at the China Industrial Bank, CIB. And he has been working on green finance with his responsibilities, including environmental and social risk management and green finance product innovation. He has been actively participating in the issuance and management and investor engagement of the industrial bank's over 100 billion RMB worth onshore and offshore green bonds. So with that, I'm very happy to have Francis join. And Francis, you have the floor.
Thanks, Eric. Does my sound sounds good?
Perfect, very clear.
Excellent. So it's an honor to be invited here to the event. So it is my first time, probably my organization's first time to join this event. So probably just a short introduction of us, because Industrial Bank, we are a nationwide Chinese commercial bank. We have been utilizing the idea of green finance for over a decade, and I would say probably accumulate some experience we can share with others. So we've been hearing about the expert talking about the PPP projects. So they are mostly from the project development level. So I'll probably just draw back a little bit and talk about the risk management to be more specific, to be more related to the SDGs and sustainability development. I'll mostly talk about the environmental and social risk management. So let me share my screen first. So the financial institutions, we have accumulated a framework or some experience on how to manage the environmental social risks. However, these infrastructures, or I would say the experience or frameworks can also be used by other market participants like PPP project manager or owner or government officials as well. So that's why it feels like it's necessary to share these experience with you. So when talk about the environmental and social risks, probably I'll just narrow down everything to the climate risks a little bit, so it's a little bit easier to explain. So it's because climate risk is a very hot topic right now, and then also you can use the similar framework to identify the other risk factors in terms of the social environments. So when we're talking about the climate risks, what we're talking about. So basically, they're generally this methodology is to classify the climate risk into two categories. We call it physical risk and transition risk. Somebody may be familiar with these terms, but I'll still give a very brief introduction. So physical risk is basically defined as risks that are raised from the physical effects of climate change or environment degradation conditions. So it could come off the risk from either floods, hurricanes, or extreme weathers associated with this climate change. So that's very related to lots of like PPP or infrastructure projects. For example, the railway projects or the subway projects. Lots of them are funded through the PPPs, and they're very vulnerable towards weather effects like flooding. Another one is called the transition risk. It's defined as the uncertainty associated with the timing and spending of adjusting to an environmental sustainable economy. So some explanation on that. It could be a rapid policy change or some legal actions. For example, if we are building thermal power plants, so you usually expect it to last at least 30 years or 40 years. However, if we took the climate change legislation acts into that, the timeline may be limited to 20 years or 15 years. So that would be really disrupt the entire project operation and financing plans. So that's example of the transition risk. So what's the relationship between them? So this graph actually, I apologize for the Chinese in it, but let me just explain it. So the horizontal one explains the years, and the vertical line tells basically the increment of the CO2 carbon dioxide density in the inner atmosphere contributed by human activities. So you can see the couple of lines in there. So the red line explains that. So we explain maybe a scenario, which means that the density of the CO2 in our atmosphere keep climbing, and the blue one means it will be decreased in the next few years. So obviously, if we don't limit the CO2 emission, we'll be facing more physical risks, like the one explained in the red lines. Because they will be raising sea levels, there will be more extreme weather like that. However, if we take very strong policy against climate change, we will end up in a scenario explained in the blue line. But however, we'll be facing more transition risks because there will be a lot of assets currently we invested in that will not suit the sustainable development ways. So that's a relationship between them. So this is definition of the climate risk. So how do we analyze it? So I would say there are usually two approaches. The first one is a macro approach. The second one is a micro approach. The macro approach is much more like a top-down analysis. It basically start with setting a climate scenario, and you start analyzing your asset structure or the industrial distribution of your assets. Then come up with either change in your financial ratios or change in your regulatory requirements. So what your analysis is your entire portfolio. But for the micro approach, this will be more like a project level analysis. You take each project out and you start doing the environmental social impact assessment, see whether they align with the climate goals, or whether the company has some certain strategy to face the future transition risks. And you can come with either with action plans to improve it, or can come with reporting or monitoring, etc. So for us, like bank or financial institutions, there are several ways to link two sides together, either through our credit preference or lending approval, or if you are environment organizations, it can be through the investment strategies. It can be through the monitoring and reporting, or it can be an active engagement from the financial institution side to the company side or to the product side. Say, hey, you should do something. I lend money to you, but I have several conditions. You should improve your awareness against climate change, etc. So I'll give a very detailed explanation to that later. So let's talk about the macro approach first. How to model, how to quantify the transition risk. This is a very typical model to do that, but it's not the only model because everyone can have the different situations, and you can just adjust these models or to suit your demands. So for this samples, the first step is to set a climate scenario. Like I just mentioned, you can expect the CO2 in our atmosphere to keep rising, to be even or decline. Just set up a scenario, and then you use several complex model to transfer this climate scenario into adjusted data, including micro data, so GDP growth. Under one climate scenarios, how the GDP would behave, how the interest rate would behave, how the inflation would behave, and also to some other factors like revenues, what the trend will be like, whether there will be a transition point, and also to the cost, to your own cost, whether there will be changing operation costs or capex. And then the step 3, you enter these data into your financial ratios, see whether they'll be changing your ROA or ROB, whether you're changing in EBITDA or leverage ratio. Then you put these financial ratios into your regular risk analysis and pricing. For asset owners like banks, we can put into the probability of default model, the PD model, or merchant model, or internal rating models. For asset managers, they can put this data into their asset pricing model. The final step is to see whether there will be change in regulatory ratios. For banks, it could be their capital adequacy ratios. For insurance, it could be their solvency ratio. This is how we model the transition risk. risk. Again, like I said, this is only one example. You can definitely start with some more simple analysis. See, for example, I can just assume that maybe the carbon price will increase by 20%, maybe 20% in the next 10 years, and see what's going on. It'll be less comprehensive, but it will be much easier. So about modeling the physical risk. So actually, there have been lots of practice in this already. So maybe if there's someone from the insurance industry, he or she probably will be more familiar with this than me. So it's called in the insurance industry, it's called the Catastrophe Model. So basically, you analyze the probability of a hurricane or a tsunami, and then put into a model because it can can have influence from two aspects. For example, if I am valuing the risk I insure, for example, I insure real estate or a house. So the loss can come from two sides, maybe from the operation interruption, because there will be if there's a tsunami, the business operation will be interrupted, and the household income will be interrupted. And also it can come from the loss of the property damaging, because the house can be damaged by the tsunami itself. So by combining these two things together, we can just model the physical risk. So there are also lots of practice with this model already. So I won't go through these details, but just in short, some academic had do some research on it, and they come up with some results showing that the default rate will increase a lot if we take these effects into considerations. And also some regulators are moving. The European Central Bank, the Bank of England, they start to do the climate pressure test on the financial institutions, and so does other regulators like regulators in Hong Kong and Singapore. So some actions to take probably for financial institutions or for project developers. We should do some regular analysis on the climate risk exposure. Well, like see how much in my portfolio or within my company's assets, how many of them are vulnerable to climate risks, and we should set certain rules and targets to manage and reduce these climate risks. And also we can engage with our clients actively, so that they can be aware of what kind of risk they're exposed to, so that and etc. So like I just mentioned, there are two approaches. So like I just give a brief introduction on the micro one. So the micro approach is the project level one. This one I'll just take the Equator Principles as an example, but however, that's just one approach. For each participant, we should choose the one that is aligned with the local regulations or laws or local best practice. However, the Equator Principle the industrial bank as us, we have been utilizing it for over a decade, and we find it quite useful. So I'll just use that example. So Equator Principle is just like voluntary standards for financial institutions to determine, assessing, and managing the environmental and social risks. So there are 10 principles of it. Basically, it just tells you how to manage and how to manage a project's environmental and social risks. It comes from further categorizing. You have to determine whether there's a high risk projects, medium risk, or low risk, and then you come up with different actions on them. You do the ENS assessment. You have to have a ENS management system. You do the stakeholder engagement. You got the grievances mechanism so that stakeholders can come up with their ideas or different opinions. You have to have independent review. You have to follow coverance so that these requirements are written in the agreement or and are fully compliant. Also have to be reporting and transparency. So the Equator Principle that follows like 8 for the IFSC's performance standards, which is 8 points, specific standards you have to do in the ENS assessments. So basically covers the environmental side, covers the humanitarian side, the labor condition side, come up with the community health, land use, biodiversity, and climate issues, etc. So by analyzing these 8 performance standards, you categorize the project finance into three categories, A, B, and C. So A basically is just the projects with very high potential of adverse environmental social risks. So it can be the poor construction, or if we start talk about the infrastructure ones, it could be the railway projects that may occupy or interrupt the ENS some sensitive areas, such as the biodiversity-rich areas. So that's quite related to infrastructure development also. But most of the infrastructure fall into the category B, which is that they have some potential damage towards ENS. However, it can be limited or can be significantly mitigated. And there are some type C, which is projects that don't have much potential in damaging the environment. So this is the way you're implementing the environmental social risk management in the project. So you determine the risk category, you do the ENS assessment, and you do the risk inspection based on the ENS assessment. So you sign the legal documents with the clients, and the clients and financial institutions do their regular reporting. So these are some benefits for financial institutions. It basically unveil your some ENS risk factors. So that's the most benefits for financial institution, and also reduce your reputational risk. And you have a closer engagement with your project owners. For project owners, ESCAP offers them an opportunity to unveil some the potential risks in their projects and help them to improve their ESG scores, and also some benefits to local community and other stakeholders. So that's a little about industrial bank itself, but due to time limit, probably I'll just skip this part. And that's just a very brief introduction of how the environmental social risk management work. So I'll probably just stop here, and Eric, I'll give the floor back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francis. Another very comprehensive presentation. Also, now I have a better understanding of the differences between transition risk and physical risk, and also just noting about natural disasters. For example, I know that in Singapore they have just built a new port for a new container port, and they have already, the new port has been raised by 1.5 meters just in anticipation of sea level rise. So it's very interesting, and so these are things that need to be taken very seriously. So I've just been sent a note that I need to shake up the who will speak next here, because Mr. Michael Sung is going to have to step out. So I'm going to have Michael Sung present next. Now, Michael is a technology venture builder and investor, having founded various companies over the years in diverse high-tech industries ranging from AI, blockchain, semiconductor, and new materials industry. Professor Sung is co-founder of Elucid Blue Ventures, a leading investment firm focused on DeFi, NFT, GameFi, Metaverse innovation. He is also the founder and chairman of Carbon Blue Innovations, a cross-border fintech venture building platform that is focused on rapidly commercializing and scaling internationally sourced blockchain, fintech, and digital finance innovations in developing countries. So I also want to note that he's also the founding co-director of the Fudan Fanhai FinTech Research Center at the Fanhai International School of Finance at Fudan University. So with that, Michael, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric, and thank you for accommodating this. I have to step out to another panel pretty soon. So I don't have my slides with me, but I think I'll be able to give a nice verbal description of what's going on. I think the topic here really is how green finance can really help drive PPP. And I think this is really, as the keynote indicated, this is really a powerful force of green finance that's coming, right? I'll give you some numbers, right? In 2019, 130 banks signed the UN Environmental Program Pact to direct their combined $47 trillion of AUM. That's roughly 30–40% of the entire finance sector of the world towards sustainability, right? And the green bond market in particular is roughly about a $500 billion market now and growing phenomenally. Post COP26, post COVID, I think everybody can feel that sustainability is on everybody's mind. So it's gone from the sort of backwater, sort of CSR type scenario to most of the sought after investments and actually mandates to do so are in sustainability. Okay, so I think literally there's trillions of dollars that want to go into projects of development, including PPP projects, and the question is, how are you going to do that? Now, specifically, one example of that is in green bonds. They have what we call the Green Bond Principles by the ICMA, International Capital Markets Association, or also the Climate Bond Initiative. These are the two international standards for this. They basically list out a lot of the guidelines for issuing these green bonds. What's a green bond? A green bond is a normal debt bond by a sovereign or by corporate, but with additional stipulation that the use of funds have to go into green projects, right? And so that use of funds, the tracking of that use of funds is the limiting factor by which you can unlock the compliance of these financial institutions to go into and invest in the space, right? So literally the compliance aspect of these financial institutions are the ones that are actually really holding back investment into the space. Okay, so how can we solve that problem? I'm a digital finance expert, and it just happens that blockchain technology is the enabling technology. So whether or not that's integration of ESG reporting, the tracking and tracing of the use of funds, stakeholder alignment, compliance checking, these factors in the industry are all quite scattered right now. So for a financial institution to want to be able to invest, they right now would have to go to a third-party auditing firm, spend a lot of money, spend 6 months manually, developing a report that can unlock their compliance and go through a bunch of compliance checks, interjurisdictional stuff, integrating ESG reporting. It's a big mess. It's not integrated. Okay, so with blockchain, I would imagine over the next few years, a lot of this integration will happen and dramatically lower the bar for investment to be able to go into it, because now it's basically all automated and it's not as hard to be able to do, right? There is a major issue with greenwashing, okay, what they call it, where basically you raise a green bond, but in the end you take the money and do something else. So that compliance aspect is a critical role, right? So that's one thing. I think the digitization of these green bonds is a huge phenomenon. I happen to work a lot on the China side. I'll use this as an example because China in many ways is leading the world, not only in the technology stack, like the blockchain stack to do it, but to really deploy this, right? Xi Jinping wants to be carbon neutral by 2060. The latest numbers are that's going to require 487 trillion RMB. That's roughly 80 trillion RMB over the next few decades to reach that goal. So being a sort of a command economy, the whole country is moving toward this goal. So rapidly trying to achieve that, right? And so they're adopting blockchain technology. They're adopting digitization. The whole country itself is now digitizing everything, right? From the the CSRC, the China Securities Reform Commission, the SEC equivalent of China, is now digitizing securities registration on blockchain. Trade finance is already scaled to billions of dollars on blockchain. So China is really leading the world on this technology. Sort of a different topic, but related, is carbon credits. In China, they announced last few months the ETS program, mandatory program, and now all these companies in China have carbon allowances, but they don't actually know what to do with these carbon allowances. Okay, they know that in the future these carbon allowances are going to be more and more valuable, but right now they aren't able to do anything with that. So actually, an emerging phenomenon actually Francis's industrial bank is leading this type of stuff, is to be able to take these carbon allowances and then collateralize them, okay, to be able to get low interest loans or bonds at preferential borrowing terms, right? And so there's all these sort of new, I would say, structured financing, new techniques that will be can be brought to bear to be able to do that. Now, carbon itself is a very interesting market as well, because now there's a voluntary market and things like that. Another technique is because when we're talking about blockchain, we're able to digitize this asset. What does that mean? 20 years ago, we digitized information, and you saw what that did to the world. Information became free, it democratized access, all sorts of big data opportunities on top. The same thing is going to happen with all assets in all asset classes. We are in the midst of a digitization revolution. Okay, the UN has done a report to show that within 7 years, there's going to be $24 trillion of regulated. We're not talking about the crypto, Bitcoin stuff. We're talking about regulated securities that are digitized. These securities, you know, 24 trillion. What does that mean? You know, to put a number on that, the global broader money supply is $96 trillion. So a quarter of the world's money or value, okay, is going to be digitized within the next half decade and change, right? And so this is not something that from 10 years from now, the world is really moving on. And so I think this is something to watch out. When we digitize securities, what does that do? That provides what we call liquidity, right? The same way you did it with information and library books. Now you can be on Wikipedia, right? Now an asset can get global liquidity. It can be vaccinated ownership to be able to do retail. So now even you know, financially excluded you know, retail investors can participate, and that liquidity can pool. So you can find a much larger market for that. So I think basically one you know, example of that is in the carbon exchange markets, right? In the carbon exchange markets, regional markets, let's say in Indonesia or Bangladesh, may not have the liquidity locally, but now by digitization, you can pool this liquidity across regions and get a global, broad investor base to be able to do that. So these are several techniques of digitization, of using blockchain, that I think will really allow green finance to thrive in this next era. And I think everybody should be looking at these sort of techniques for PPP. And if there's any sort of interest in that, I'm happy to provide all sorts of information and additional links. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michael. Okay, I notice we're getting some questions popping up, but if there's any specific question for Michael since he has to leave, please do so now. Otherwise, we'll do Q&A at the end of the session. Just to highlight some of the things that Michael noted, that CSR, you know, we've moved sort of away from this CSR thinking towards, you know, sought after investments in sustainability, and the importance of green bonds. What is a green bond? It's going to help with funding for green projects, and then raising the issue of the importance of how blockchain works, and then as well as greenwashing. And how to avoid this greenwashing through compliance measures as well. And then touching, and I think that the highlight of Michael's presentation was that we have to be ready for this digital revolution that's occurring in our midst. Things such as digitizing equity, for example. So I will step away from that. I want to thank Michael again for his presentation, and let me now move on to our next presenter, Ms. Ekaterina Miroshnik. She is the director and head of the Infrastructure Eurasia European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD. Now, she joined EBRD in London in 2000, and during her career in the EBRD, she has covered infrastructure projects in a number of countries in Europe, Eurasia, Turkey, and Southern and Eastern Mediterranean. She has assignments in the field with, for almost 12 years, first in Moscow, and then Almaty, Kazakhstan. She currently leads the EBRD Infrastructure Eurasia team, so which is quite key to, I'm sure Kyrgyzstan may want to pick her mind later as we move into the Q&A. And as well, her team provides debt and equity financing for public-private partnership PPP projects. And with that, I'm very fortunate to hand the floor over to Ms. Ekaterina. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure to be at this panel today. I have a few slides that I would like to share with everyone. So I hope you can see it. 1 second. Yes, so I would like to tell you a bit about our approach to green financing, and basically it's something that we have in EBRD, but many international financial institutions and international banks, they have similar approaches, so that would be actually useful for the countries participating. So we have this green economy transition approach that we adopted a few years ago, and basically we tried to invest more and more into green projects. And over the last years, from 3 billion euros to 4.5 billion euros were invested per annum, in those green investments. So our goal now is to increase the green projects we do to 50% of our business by 2025. That's the main goal. So we want to increase, we want to do more of green financing. So what were the results so far? So we financed over the last 15 years, 2,287 projects, which we consider green. So they were for amount of 40 billion euros across all the countries where we operate. And out of this 40 billion, 24 billion euros went into green sustainable infrastructure. So what were the outcomes, and impacts of those investments? 111 million tons of CO2 emissions were reduced per annum. And this is more than the annual energy use, of related emissions in Greece. We saved 573 million meters cubical of water per annum. And this is more than, the annual water consumption by 1/3 of London's population. And we also avoided 3.5 million tons of material use per annum. And this amounts to the waste generated in Latvia, for example, in a particular year. So basically, the results are great. So what's happening now? We have upgraded our green economy transition approach. So we now have the second phase of this approach. So we are trying to support green, low carbon and resilient economy. So by the end of next year, so in a year from now, we would like all our operations to be Paris aligned. So we've started screening all our projects right now, but from January 2023, we won't be able to commit any money into a project if it's not Paris aligned. We are also enhancing policy engagement, with countries for the development of long-term low carbon strategies. We scale up investments across a set of specific thematic areas, like, for example, circular economy or natural capital. But again, the aim is to increase, the share of green investments in the bank's portfolio. And we want to do 50% of annual business as green from 2025. So this is a strong commitment. So what's the correlation between green and Paris-aligned financial flows? Projects which are Paris-aligned are characterized by limited carbon footprint or carbon intensity, limited vulnerability for physical climate hazards, low carbon lock-in risk, and they should be consistent with long-term low carbon development. But not all Paris-aligned projects are green. So for green projects, we expect a bit more. So there should be significant climate change mitigation benefits or adaptation, outcomes, or significant environmental benefits. For example, protection and restoration of ecosystems and pollution prevention. So again, in a year's time, we want all our projects to be Paris Agreement aligned. And by 2025, we want 50% of our business to be green. So what are their limitations? We are trying to do less in fossil fuels. And again, it's not only us, it relates to all international financial institutions and many international banks. So EBRD from now on will not invest in any fossil fuel project unless this project is aligned with the Paris Agreement and meets a strong ambition to accelerate the low carbon transition. So basically, the project should be aligned with their low carbon strategy. It should have a low risk of carbon lock-in. It should be subject to a thorough assessment of stranded asset risk and demonstrate best available technologies, BAT, and meets the highest environmental and social standards. So again, many bankers and banks in the market are trying to do more green investments, you know, and there is a strong appetite and actually the whole change of mind in the banking industry and among investors as well. So, you know, more green investment, you know, less fossil fuels and more projects which are Paris aligned. So one of the instruments that is very popular and has become very popular among investors, among institutional investors, you know, is green bonds. So basically, EBRD was one of the first players in the market. We issued our first green bond in 2010, and since then we issued 119 green bonds, totaling 7.7 billion euros. So we are also an investor in green bonds. We are working with clients across our countries of operations, and we invest directly into bonds and through fund structures. We are also trying to formulate or help the market to formulate green bond principles. We are a member of the executive committee of the green bond principles, co-chairing a number of working groups. We're also working closely with the European Commission. We are on the task force. We are assisting in development of the EU Green Taxonomy and EU Green Bond Standard. So in addition to that, we are also providing some technical assistance to clients in our countries of operations to accelerate green bond issuances. And green bonds are becoming a very hot topic. Again, institutional investors, private money is looking for green projects, and green bonds, you know, is the instrument for them to invest. So I would like to share with you an example. It's a case study of Georgian Railways. This is the project that we've done. I'm sorry, you cannot see my slides anymore, I guess. Apologies for that, just get suppressed something. So yes, so this is the project that we've done recently, a couple of months ago. It's a green bond issued by Georgian Railways, a state-owned company, for $500 million. It's a 7-year unsecured Eurobond listed in London. So we subscribed for $50 million. You know, Georgian Railways tapped the market of green bonds for the first time. And I have to say that Georgia is not an investment grade country. Nevertheless, you know, there was a huge appetite from the market to invest in this bond. The bond was 8 times oversubscribed. Georgian Railways managed to get a very good pricing, you know, for that deal. Again, because institutional investors are looking for green projects, they're looking for green bonds. They're not interested in plain vanilla old type projects. But I have to say that green bonds are very hot, but also sustainable bonds or sustainability linked bonds. You know, they're also very popular. You know, in order to validate, you know, and, to ensure that the Georgian Railway bond is aligned with the green bond principle, Georgian Railways involved S&P Standard & Poor's. Standard & Poor's certified that the issuance complies with green bond principles, and basically that allows institutional investors to invest. So again, a very popular theme, and I would recommend countries to consider, helping, their companies across to issue green bonds. So now I would like to talk a bit about Central Asia and PPPs. Central Asia is very close to my heart. I've been working and covering this market for many, many years, and we have different types of countries there. We have Kazakhstan, which is an investment grade country, and we have other smaller countries which are not investment grade. Nevertheless, the PPP legislation in many of those countries is quite good. We managed to close the first internationally tendered PPP in Kazakhstan last year. It was Bakat-Almaty Ring Road. It's a flagship deal, for the region. It reached financial closure in August last year. and it's going to be a benchmark for other PPPs in the region. You know, in many countries, there is an ambitious infrastructure pipeline, and green infrastructure is becoming a very common theme, supported by many governments in Central Asia. And the projects are, you know, included into this are resource efficiency projects, various, you know, water projects or wastewater projects, district heating projects, and also renewables. So these are the positive developments. You know, however, large-scale projects in this market are still only possible with the recourse to sovereign. So we all have to recognize that. Borrowing capacity of some of the states has been affected by COVID. And also, unfortunately, so far, infrastructure user charges are below cost recovery. So for PPPs in this market, in this region, we expect availability payment-based schemes. So when the government provides availability payments. Nevertheless, PPPs are possible. And again, I would like to mention Bakat, which was closed last year. It's our flagship project. It's a construction of a 66-kilometer bypass around Almaty. The project will improve the air quality for Almaty citizens. It's a large transaction. The project costs are around $750 million. We have great investors. We have several Turkish companies and a Korean investor. Again, the road construction is underway. It's progressing very well. You know, the project got the P5 Deal of the Year last year. Again, it's a great project, properly structured, and it's availability payment based or with currency risk mitigation. You know, however, I have to say that going forward, it may be more difficult to basically attract money for road projects. So we have to be mindful that, again, you know, this project should be Paris aligned, and they should be EV or electric vehicles ready, and the roads should be climate resilient to attract you know, investors, institutional investors. So we have to think how to make these projects green. And this is about roads. So again, the message for the country is, if you have road projects in your PP pipeline, please start thinking how to make these roads greener. You know, to make them more attractive for investors. And of course, investors are looking for green projects nowadays. So what do we have in the pipeline in Central Asia, in the PP pipeline? We have, for example, in Uzbekistan, water supply and sewage PPPs. We have Namangan wastewater treatment plant under tender with the bid submissions. You know, a deadline on the 4th of December. We are yet to hear from the Uzbek government who the preferred bidder is. But such project and similar projects would be considered green by investors, and you know, and the project would attract cheaper financing. We also have public schools and student accommodation in Uzbekistan, and hospital facility management PPPs in Kazakhstan, up to 20 hospitals, you know, in the state PP program. Again, public schools and hospitals, you know, they're PPPs around buildings, and these buildings are expected to be energy efficient. They expect to receive the EDGE certification, and by default, they will be considered green by investors. So again, good projects in the pipeline, you know, likely to be considered green, and again, they will attract investors, and they will attract cheap financing going forward. So this is it from my side. These are the contacts of myself and my colleagues working in the region. In case there are questions, I would be happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Katarina. That was an excellent presentation. And as we're all learning, things are already happening. For example, the Bakat PPP in Kazakhstan. I think that we have Mongolia here today. They're doing a highway across, it looks like from Russian Federation through Mongolia to China. It would be, if you're looking for funding, maybe this is one area to discuss with Katarina. And also looking at how mindset changes are happening in Central Asia and Eurasia, for example, Georgia, and accessing green bonds. And then the other thing that was very interesting is the GET, Green Economy Transition, you know, that Katarina was talking about, where where her bank is moving to at least 50% of businesses need to move towards green finance, and this is very key. And then also demonstrating projects need to demonstrate greenhouse gas emissions reduction and water consumption, and these have already taken place. So it's really wonderful to see this, and it's not that something that's in front of us. It's here now. So it's something that we all need to embrace. So with that, thank you so much for Ekaterina for sharing that excellent presentation. And like has been mentioned earlier, we can take questions at the end of the session. So with that, let me move on to our next presenter, Professor Dave Fernandez. He is the director of the Sin Ki Boon Institute for Financial Economics, and he is a professor of the practice of finance at the Lee Kong Chian School of Business at the Singapore Management University. He is also the co-director of the Singapore Green Finance Center. This is how I was able to find him. It was through the Green Finance Center, which is jointly run by SKBI and the Imperial College London Center for Climate Finance and Investment. Outside of SMU, he was recently appointed the chair of the advisory panel at the ASEAN +3 Macroeconomic Research Office. And additionally, he sits on the academic council at the Impact Economy Foundation and is a member of the Stewardship Discussion Circle at Stewardship Asia. So with that, I'm very pleased to and very fortunate once again to have Professor Dave join us. And Dave, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Eric. And again, like the other speakers, I would say that it's a pleasure and an honor to be speaking to this audience. I am much more familiar with Zoom than I am Teams. Am I sharing something with you? Can you see anything? No.
Yes, it's clear.
Oh, really? Okay, well, that's amazing because I can't see it myself. So hopefully when I flip it, it'll change. But thank you again, Eric, for inviting me. I was pleased to see this, and Eric has invited me on the premise that countries in the ESCAP region could learn something about Singapore and how it's built an ecosystem for sustainable investing and potentially attract mainstream investment to this biggest development challenge of our time, climate change. And so what this really is going to be then, what I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes doing is just give a very high level discussion about the ecosystem, because while the outcome here is to be very specific, which is to attract mainstream capital to infrastructure in particular, it really does, I think, have to be seen holistically across different stakeholders and in the context of global finance, where funds flows can have so many opportunities and where within that big ecosystem, within that big flow context, channeling and attracting funds to this specific need can be looked at properly and not in isolation. So did my slide change when I did that?
Yes.
Okay, very good, excellent. So just on Singapore, specifically, Singapore is set out as a nation, as a republic, its Green Plan 2030. It is a whole of nation movement with the broad intention of getting every citizen on board to its goals, motivating people to help transform the city-state into a global city of sustainability. So it's a very overarching plan, and that again is going to be the theme of mine, which is to think about in the context of a specific desire to get finance channeled into this area. How does it fit into a bigger picture? Now, something to mention specifically on what Singapore is up to in the specific area. As many of you know, Singapore does have a carbon price in Singapore dollar terms. It's about $5, which is about $4 US levy per ton of CO2 equivalent. within Southeast Asia. It's the only nation to have a price, so Indonesia has stated plans to do so in 2022. And I think, again, that sets the context for what I'm about to say, which is that certainly in Southeast Asia, this is all emerging. This is all new. It's all fast changing. I think we're all very optimistic, and properly so, on the prospects for attracting funds to this area. But the reality is that it's all happening very quickly, and it's all very new. And my basic suggestion is that everyone plug in to the different networks that are working so hard to make this a reality and to get these funds channeled quickly to where they're needed. So the specific things, hopefully, that maybe is of interest to those on this call in terms of what's happened in Singapore just over the past few years. For me personally, I only rejoined academia 3 years ago. And at that point, this really wasn't a thing within the area that I was in previously, which is 20 years in the private sector at JP Morgan and at Barclays, working in the research teams there. It was only becoming something as I was returning to academia. And then quickly after returning to academia, Singapore, from a top-down point of view, announced its intention to develop this area of green finance. And as a result of this announcement, this desire and an action plan that follow up with it, I, from my position as a professor at Singapore Management University, helped to establish the first Center of Excellence in this area, known as the Singapore Green Finance Center. We did that with the support of the Central Bank of the Monetary Authority of Singapore, and we reached out to a global partner, Imperial College London, who had gotten a head start in this area, but not much of a head start. And I think that's, again, a theme for us here in the region, that while the Europeans, as Katerina has pointed out, and others have been a bit more, have a bit more experience in this, it is just a bit more, and we can, in Asia, ramp up our activities, we believe, fairly quickly. When it comes to the ecosystem and having it, this announcement made by Singapore government with the support of central bank, bringing on board academic partners, we think was a very important component. And so obviously that's where I sit at university, and we brought in another university, Imperial College London. But I think we also recognize that it would be critical for this to happen quickly by immediately looping in the private sector. So our founding partners for the Singapore Green Finance Center included 7 banks and 2 asset managers that are listed on this screen. I think the idea with them, bringing them on board, is that we can think about our audience in the whole ecosystem, as I said, of policymakers, academics, and critically private sector practitioners, to understand the dynamics of their investment choices that they're making, of the inflows that they're seeing, both of which are extremely positive. But I think for us to be intelligent and savvy about attracting those funds, we need to be in touch with them on a high frequency basis. So the overall plan is, again, to be holistic, not just to look at market development, but also to do research and to educate our different constituencies. And so those are all activities that we're engaged in. And just let me close by talking about the ways in which, in the audiences that we're trying to reach out to. So this is a very specific course that we are mounting, which is focused on this topic of growing infrastructure. We're doing it in partnership with World Bank Group, with Infrastructure Asia here in Singapore, and then my institute at Singapore Management University. The idea is we're targeting decision makers in this sector, in this region, in South and Southeast Asia, and building up over a series of modules, competencies, and an understanding of PPP, which has obviously been quite an important topic for today's event. But going through logistics and supply chain issues, to digitization, all of these things are topics that we are focused on in this specific example of execution that ties together not just education, but hopefully building the network that will result in this flowing faster. Last two things I'll mention in terms of ways that we're trying to connect with this ecosystem. Certainly we're doing classes, so we're starting at the the student level to build up the next generation of those who would work in this, but we're also going to the opposite end. We initiated something called Climate Governance Singapore, which is part of an initiative from the World Economic Forum, which is to get to the top of a companies, to the boards of directors, to have them educated and at some point maybe certified as having an understanding of sustainability and what their responsibilities are as leaders of their respective companies. That climate governance initiative from the World Economic Forum now I think has about 20 chapters. I think when we signed on, Singapore is the 15th, Malaysia had already done so, Australia has recently done so. And so this is one segment of the ecosystem that we think is important, which is the boards of directors. And lastly, we just recently became a knowledge partner for something called WISE, which is focused on women and the choices and the power that women have in driving the change in this area. WISE is an acronym for Women in Sustainability and the Environment, which is a Singapore-based group that just was announced. So those are the types of things that we think are happening in Singapore that hopefully are helpful for this audience to know about. And the bottom line is it's changing very quickly. And that the strategy, even if in a very specific goal of trying to attract investment to infrastructure, that you should do so in the context of the overall ecosystem. And so I'm posting here a link to our institute, where if anyone wants to connect and to be part of our desire to make this a broad net of people involved with us, that you could please go ahead and do that. So Eric, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Dave, Professor Dave. Very interesting also to share the Singapore government's response to climate change, and also highlighting once again the importance of getting into the right networks so that one country's project proposals can gain access to green financing, and hopefully through today's investment fair we've helped a little bit with that. But also the growing infrastructure course. I see it's directed towards ASEAN countries, but I can see now there will probably be interest here from countries outside of ASEAN, Central Asia, Northeast Asia, South Asia, for example. So I anticipate that in the future that Professor Dave will probably be using this course to reach out to others in the region. And thank you so much now for sharing that. And I see there's a link here, so in the chat. So excellent for sharing that. And with that, let me move on to our final speaker. It's been a very excellent panel, but let me introduce and then thank you for his patience, Mr. Ashwani Ahuja. He is the Managing Director of Investment Banking Country Group. He has in-depth experience in leading corporate finance, direct equity investment, and investment analysis. He has experience in privatization, telecom, power, utilities, debenture issuance, placement and underwriting, initial public offerings, dual listing, deal execution, deal sourcing, and development of investment strategies and investment plans, and also business process reengineering, strategic planning, supply chain management, and capital raising. And his experience spans from South Asia and India to Southeast Asia. as well as South America and also Central Asia and Russia and Canada and the US. So with that, Mr. Ashwani, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure, enjoying these informative sessions from each member of the panel today. Thank you for having me on board, and the patience as well. Apologies, I was traveling a bit. I just started taking up travel and that held me back, but I really appreciate being on this panel, and it's been very educational, every aspect of it. I'll just contribute a wee bit of what I can do from my experience. And I think when we look at sustainable financing or green financing, and I think as the other members also highlighted, as Professor Dave highlighted, Eric highlighted about the banks playing a role. I think looking from where we stand when we look at financing aspect, I think the biggest challenge which we see here is data environment. The data environment is very limited around these projects, and that makes financing very, very difficult. Most of the bigger companies, when we talk about larger, whether we talk conglomerates or leading companies in the countries which are in their respective sectors, where we talk about packaging or we talk about, I'm talking about sustainable financing about every aspect. When we started about green financing, it all started with power, renewable energy. That was the focus of everyone focusing on it. I think renewable energy over the years has matured quite a bit, and we have quite a bit of awareness around it when we talk about solar farms, and now we have floating farms and rooftop farms and house, home rooftop kind of energy generation as well. And that kind of financing has really caught up. But what we see, the biggest challenge out here is that Thailand has taken its own steps within the region itself. We're taking and looking at other Asian markets when we look at projects within the region and outside the region as well. The challenge which we see as financial institutions look at it, be the likes of development banks or the large financial international financial institutions who are ready to fund that, there is ample liquidity. There is no denial, and I'm sure everybody would agree to it, as I think we were hearing from another colleague of ours earlier through the presentation, that there is ample money available. Liquidity is being picked up for larger projects. The challenge remains is especially in Asian part of the market or Southeast Asia or East Asia, where we see there is no key essential data available on validating the so-called green part of it or the sustainable part of it. Thailand itself has taken measures. For example, the Stock Exchange of Thailand, the Central Bank, the Securities Exchange Commission, they have come together and basically put together norms where certain companies are being identified and subsequently being corporate governance rated. Ratings are being put in place to make sure that these companies are conforming to the guidelines which have put in place, because Thailand from its financial sector is looking at putting in place a plan which basically by 2025 we should be in line with all the global green financing or clean energy financing kind of norms put in place, and a very large part of financing goes into sectors which would sustain that. And we are seeing that trend happening in Asia. But when we land down the financing situation, getting these institutions to work, the biggest challenge comes is data. The data is not there. There are neither enough human capital available, which has the background to step in and validate the data and tell people that, okay, yes, this is where you qualify. Yes, there are broad guidelines available, but accessing that capital for a small and medium enterprise is very difficult. And I think that's where the major opportunity lies, because there's about 70 to 80% of economies in Asia or Southeast Asia especially are driven by SMEs. They are the ones which are the largest ones contributing to the economy, leaving out the larger conglomerates. I don't mention them. I can pick up a few names who have been very successful in this part of the world, raising green bonds, and Thai banks have seen these bonds being picked up like anything with very attractive pricings, because there's a huge demand. There is pressure on financial institutions to dedicate and make dedicated investments and invest in their portfolios as there are targets, which we saw in various presentations over the next 5 to 10 years, where a certain amount of money needs to be invested in the sectors. The challenge remains is getting these companies to those financings if you are not one of the leading companies out there. And I think that's what is the issue which we are talking at with most of the people or most of the promoters out there who are very much open to. We are seeing benefits in the other way, where we have seen green financing benefiting through trade financing has picked up. We have seen in clients who are exporting to US and Europe, and they're getting their receivable financing sorted out at much attractive rates, where they are either being identified as gigatron programs being done by Amazon and the likes of Walmart and other ones, who are working with financial institutions like HSBC and all to provide them attractive trade financing facilities at very, very attractive financing rates. That's an alternative way of going from traditional financing to going into trade financing, and that's a big cost difference, because today, if you go and start doing your so-called bills discounting in the market, it'll cost you almost ranging from different markets and credibility and credit risk from about somewhere around 5% to almost 10%. And if you go to a third-party financial institution, you might even lose out a bit more. But here are institutions which are giving you financing because you're categorized in sustainable business. You're getting about cost of it about 1.5% out there, which is substantially, attractive enough for these corporates, which are mid-size to, let's say, not very large size kind of organization, but mid to semi-large kind of organizations, and that makes it attractive. The other issue which lies out there, and I think we're looking at the development banks who are very attractively looking at, I think IFC has coordinated very closely in this part of the world with organizations like Stock Exchange of Thailand and Securities Exchange Commission, and even in other countries like Philippines and Malaysia and Singapore, not to mention, as Professor Dave mentioned about it, and that makes it a bit more attractive. But there is still a learning curve which is out there. I still see that this 2025 deadline looks very, very attractive, and sorry for being the negative part of it, but a bit too optimistic. And I think we might not see that. We might only see the large conglomerates being able to achieve on a larger portfolio. So if you are in that $1 billion offering kind of a company and you're looking to raise 10 billion baht bonds, sorry for referring in Thai baht currencies, but or a 2 billion, 10 billion, 20 billion, 30 billion, $1 billion kind of offering, you would definitely attract that kind of financing, or your large infrastructure project financing. But if you're coming in the mid to semi-mid kind of a category, that's where the real funding is required. And that's where data validation becomes very challenging. We see that, and it takes time. Like we did financing with FMO some years back. It was part of their green financing portfolio in Cambodia. Now it's a green mill which does non-chemical fertilizer-based financing. It works with a larger, a large base of family-based farming. I wouldn't call it contract farming because these are open contracts, so they're not like any contract farming, but that's where the green financing came in, and it's linked, because that kind of financing links to creating an alternative source of income, sustainable income for the farmers. Then it educates the farmers not to use any fertilizers, any chemical fertilizers, only using natural fertilizers. Then using the land to, even during the non-harvest season, you use the land when you're basically it's off season to basically have fish farms and prawn farming and other thing to maintain the cultivability and the yield aspects of the farms, rather than just overgrowing and losing it out. And that's why the financial local banks are not able to visualize that. Luckily, what we have seen in the last few years, local banks have started to pick up here in Thailand. Now we have SME financing desks being set up. Like one of the banks which has taken the lead out here is called Bangkok Bank. They call it Buoluong green financing for SMEs. Yes, the challenge still remains tough because these SMEs do not have, again, the same point. The data is not available for them to be validated. Third parties coming on board and validating this data is an expensive exercise. Finding the right kind of human capital to do subsequent reporting. I think one of the panelists mentioned about the data being the information being validated and continuous flow of information being reviewed and analyzed over a period of time. That's still quite a big of challenge, and I think that makes it only limited to companies which get qualified to be on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index and all, because they have qualified through their corporate governance rating. But this is something still far off for privately owned companies or family owned businesses, which are very much open. They are very much striving. They're moving to green packaging. They're moving to sustainable reusable packaging kind of a thing, or wooden crates which are made from rubber pallets or something like that, which can be used as recyclability can be done. And logistics is another part of the section which requires a large amount of investment, and they are directly playing on sustainability. because they are creating reuse packaging for, let's say, even export or import part of it, whether you're in the auto sector or whether you're in the other heavy industry sectors where you don't need to reinvest. So there are smaller aspects of sustainability which are still untapped, but they can be scaled up quite fast if the funding is available. And the challenge remains is that putting these companies together, I think just putting these 10 to 15 companies together, if we put it together within the SME category, we might be able to contribute even more than 10 to 20 billion kind of funding. And I'm talking in terms of dollar amounts because these companies are growing companies. They contribute a large segment of the economy within these markets. And if I just look at countries within the neighborhood, I'm not even looking at larger companies. We definitely see huge activities and timelines being set up in these major markets. But to be able to achieve these robust and larger targets, I think the biggest challenge which we see with companies is that access to that is still very much limited. Only large infrastructure projects are being pursued at this point in time because the amount of time you spend, and I don't say that is wrong, but that's a question where I think it lies with the financial institutions because they also have limited time available. They need to dedicate every year how much time of their resources towards these larger projects and allocate certain money, and they cannot put it. So the educational part lies with bringing up human capital. Number two, people with the ability to understand that what is exactly required to be done. I think Francis put up a good slide which creates educational aspect of people. They can get educated within the organization as well. For their understanding, it is very much limited to what do they understand, what really is sustainability, and how does it have to be looked at it? What are the potential impacts on climate change? But I think Thailand since 2011 has looked at it very closely, and some other economies closely, markets like Cambodia, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, every year they go through a rapid change in their climate. And today we are talking about 2 to 3 degrees every year. So they are very much bound to it to bring in changes. We have seen companies in Bangladesh bringing about new ways of coloring their fabric, which is basically they're one of the largest hubs for producing apparel wear, which goes to major brands across the world. They've changed their technology to bring in less chemical aspect of it, which has brought down over the last 3 years the usage on certain chemicals which have impact on water flows and underground water aspect has gone down by 70%. And this will be validated by third-party data. But they are not able to leverage it because there is very much limited financing available to them at that particular scale. And I think to sum it up, what I would like to say is that, yes, there is a huge opportunity. There's a huge untapped market out there, but there are a few hurdles which need to be addressed. And I think when we are today heading into 2022, and I think over the next couple of years, this needs to be addressed because if we address this out, there is a huge market. And these targets, despite though we have first target coming in 2025, I believe within the next within a decade, within the remaining 7 to 8 years before we complete head to 2030, we believe a larger part of this can be still achieved and much faster. And I think the deployment of the funds can be much more aggressively laid out. And organizations owners are more than willing to do that because the succession plannings which have happened, especially the new generation which has come in and managing these businesses, they are very open to green financing. So I guess that's pretty much the sum of it. I'm handing over back to Eric.
Thank you so much, Ashwani. Once again, highlighting a different area, and looking, we are all thinking it's all the bigger companies that seem to have the better access, but we ignore that the small medium enterprise, which is 90% of what the driving the economies in our region is all about. And then you mentioned contract farming, and I had been working in Lao PDR in the past, and I was actually up in the Bolivan Plateau where they grow most of the coffee, and there's a lot of countries moving into the Bolivan Plateau, which is about 1,100 meters above sea level because of the climate there, and not just growing coffee, but countries such as Republic of Korea and China have set up contract farming there. So it's something that the smaller countries in the region need to be aware of when countries are moving in, and how to improve the sustainability of agriculture, reducing the type of inputs that are damaging to soils and so forth. So it's quite interesting that this came up, and maybe another highlight from your presentation is this, that the data environment is limited around these types of projects because they're smaller, and this is something that is a little bit sobering that we need to be aware of. And yes, that the 2025 is probably too optimistic for what we're aiming for, but it's good to bring out this to bring us a little bit back down to earth and say there's a tremendous amount of work being done. And I can say that from the COP26, for example, yes, countries agreed to reduce their emissions, but to actually do that, to put words into action is much more difficult. So that's the big challenge here. So with that, we have one more, and thank you again, Ashwani. We have one more present. And forgive me for overlooking this. It's we have Mr. Norman Siddiqui. He is the head of the Islamic Development Bank's public-private partnership advisory function, which has the mandate to support IDB's member countries through specialized PPP and advisory support. He previously was heading the PPP operations involved in the development of innovative financing structures for infrastructure concession and arranging long-term debt capital. Now, Norman joined the IDB in 2011 and has since been engaged in the PPP business for ISDB, and that spans across Asia, sub-Saharan Africa, and the MENA region. He has been instrumental in developing the ISDB's AB Finance Islamic Umbrella Program to promote risk support, risk mitigation support, and private debt capital flows from ISDB member countries. He is trained as a corporate banker, having extensively worked in the areas of structured and project finance, debt capital markets, and loan syndications in his long career, as well as with ABN AMRO Bank, Emirates Bank International. And he holds an MBA and IBA from Karachi and an MS in finance from the University of Illinois. So he's Mr. Norman, you have the floor. Thank you.
Eric, thank you for the introduction, and obviously I would like to thank the organizers for this opportunity for IDB to be part of this program. Obviously, I mean, you know, I was present through some of the presentations, and these have been extremely informative. Obviously, the challenge is how do we basically capture everything and roll it out as a single uniform product? Obviously, that cannot happen, but I think the struggle continues. This is an opportunity for us, and I think a lot of people may not be aware of who we are and what we do. So with your permission, I would like to just basically have, I have a presentation that I would like to share, and let me try to see if I can quickly, I'll try to be quick, and I understand that, you know, we basically, let's see.
It's up, and take your time, don't rush.
Oh, okay, yeah, no, I will. And I just want to make sure that I get the right presentation here. Okay, perfect. So, okay, I think probably now I have the right presentation there. Again, this is really from my perspective. I think we have heard a lot of speakers come in and talk from their different perspectives. And obviously, when we are talking about the PPP agencies, we are talking about MDBs, multilateral development banks. We're talking about financial private sector, IFIs. Obviously, the perspective is all really making the countries and making the businesses move in kind of a unison into a certain direction. And I think just to sort of give you an introduction as to who we are and what we do. IDB Islamic Development Bank, it's basically a multilateral bank. It was established in 1975, headquartered in Jeddah. We are basically owned by the member countries of OIC. Now, obviously, the member countries of OIC, from the east, we go from Indonesia, Brunei, Malaysia, all the way to sub-Saharan Africa, Southern Africa, and then a couple of countries within South America. So this is basically quite a big region. And as you can very well understand that most of the countries, a very large majority of the countries belong to the least developed countries group. So obviously the challenge, given that these countries have to basically come up the curve with a huge struggle, our challenge basically is to support them, and our challenge is to really make sure that we provide whatever assistance and help that we can in order for these countries to get the necessary funding and the necessary finance in order to support their infrastructure and economic development. Now, it's easier said than done, because obviously not just that these, I mean, the very definition that these are less developed countries also implies that they have a huge fiscal constraint. And so when you have a huge fiscal constraint and you're also within that category, then attracting private capital is not easy, and you don't have the fiscal capacity, the fiscal envelope to do everything on your own. So anyways, this is our job as an MDB. Now, obviously, what also happens is that the region that we cover, it has an overlap with other MDBs. So in Asia, we have Asian Development Bank supporting these countries, our member countries. Then as we come into the African and MENA region, then obviously we have got the African Development Bank and IFC and the World Bank and the others basically supporting and trying to help these member countries. Now, obviously, the focus is infrastructure. So the key areas that we look at, agriculture, infrastructure, industrial sectors, education, healthcare, and social sector. These are some of the core areas for that we look at. Now, from a very let's say sustainability, green, and renewable perspective, we in the last 4 or 5 years, we have gradually shifted our focus. We have basically tried to do a lot of. I think somebody mentioned that renewable was the easy part or the starting part. So yes, as an MDB, we try to support and we try to move away within the power sector, away from the traditional thermal plants into more renewable. So we went into hydro and wind and solar. So these were some of the projects that we wanted to support, and obviously that was our way of showing that yes, moving into this higher sustainable, let's say, a dialogue is important. And so these are some of the projects that we have financed, but I think it's important and I think we all understand that it is a challenging task when we look at the global community of obviously countries. Some countries are way ahead, and they have the luxury, or they can afford basically taking a quantum leap in this direction of making sure that all investing in all infrastructure development is sustainable. So this is something that they can do. On the other side of the spectrum, we have our countries, and we have to also realize that not all can basically play catch up, and it will take it would be a gradual process in which we are able to basically bring them to that level of understanding, building capacity, working with them, trying to basically make sure that there is a gradual institutional development in terms of understanding and embracing the principles which lie behind, whether we are talking about the Paris alignment, we are talking about the SDGs, we are talking about sustainability. All these are going to happen, but it is going to take time. And so we realize that, and obviously we as an institution, especially as an institution serving these member countries, we realize this, and we are cognizant of the fact that there has to be a very gradual build-up of understanding capacity so that these countries can embrace it, and obviously we work on that. So let me now move to some of these areas, because we have talked, a lot of speakers have talked about some very, very good issues. Let me talk about how do we look at this whole dialogue, this global dialogue. Now, ISDB, our commitment to SDG is there. We have reinforced that, and the agenda is something that we basically own up to. And it is something that, yes, globally this has been accepted as something that needs to be done. So this is just to show that not just our commitment to SDGs, but we also recognize the development objectives vary from one country to another. Now, this is very important, and the reason I stress this is because sometimes when we are on a let's say larger platform like today's, we are talking about countries which obviously which are very well developed, like Korea. We talked about Korea, and then we move on to obviously when we look at countries like Bangladesh, and then we move into Central Asia, and we can see that these are at different levels of maturity, understanding, capacity. So this is something which we need to keep in mind. Now, sustainability, what does it mean? We are basically committed to prioritizing the SDGs in accordance with specific development needs of our own member countries. This is a very, very important issue for us. And obviously, what we are trying to do is that we have sector policies which are very well aligned with the SDGs, and these policies really are within these sectors of health, energy, climate change, transport, education, agriculture, and this is important. And we make sure that all our interventions, all our financing complies with this. We basically one of the important thing was, and I think we have talked about a lot of discussion and dialogue has taken place on the ability to tap into investor base, which is basically looking for sustainable and green financing, and so just wanted to identify that we have eligible assets portfolio of 6.1 billion within this framework, of which 3.9 billion are social assets and $2.2 billion are green assets. And this is basically obviously our finance. This would serve as a foundation to issue green, social and sustainability GSS Sukuk. Sukuks are equivalent to the bonds. These are just Islamic bonds. So, and we have actually gone out to the market and we have raised 1.5 billion US dollars by way of green Sukuk. And obviously implying that if we have 6.1 billion assets today, which comply with this framework, we started the journey some years back. So we are already, we have started the journey, we are already underway in terms of basically, but as I said, that this is a gradual process and we recognize that, but we will continue to work on that. Sustainability. Now, so we have got, let's say, three broad areas. One is the green, the climate action, the adaptation, the mitigation. This is something that we focus on all our projects, the intervention, the design of our intervention and the design of the projects, that they basically should come as close to making sure that we have all climate action, adaptation, mitigation built into that. Then the second pillar that we have within our sustainability is relates to health, education, women and youth, SMEs. So this is something, again, these are all our, our pillars are linked to the SDGs. And as you can see that these SDGs, as we identify, basically we try to comply and we try to make sure that our intervention is as close and brings us as close as possible to the SDGs and the spirit behind the SDGs. And finally, the ESG framework. This is absolutely important. I have to acknowledge that we were late in embracing the ESG framework. We have we spent a lot of time in discussions in basically bringing our member countries and basically trying to bring some sort of a consensus in terms of what kind of ESG framework we need to develop that they would be able to comply with and how gradual that rollout should be. But environment and social safeguards, including strong governance, that has now embedded. So these three pillars are now embedded in our interventions and in our financing of all infrastructure, hard and soft infrastructure projects going forward. Now, very quickly, I talked about the Sukuk issuance. So that was something that we felt, yes, the time was right and we were able to go to the market. Given that we had built up a good portfolio that we could actually show to the investors that this is something that we have basically been doing. Now, we were assigned a rating of medium green shading. So, I mean, again, you know, sometimes we get, without getting bogged down with the wordings, so, you know, it is probably a path that we have to follow, whereby from a medium green, we basically built in a much more stronger, much more a greener portfolio. But again, I think the sukuk or the bond was well received, and the investors basically like what we are at least trying to achieve, and the results that we have been able to get so far. Now, climate change, again, this is one of the more important areas that we have tried to sort of focus on, and the climate change policy that we have basically put in place is, I mean, the biggest thing is that obviously mainstreaming climate action in banks operations. So this is a very focused and a dedicated area which we basically deploy in all our intervention, in all our financing, in all infrastructure interventions that happen from IDB. Promoting climate change resilience. This is again a dialogue that we have to have. And as I said earlier, building the capacity, building the understanding. Obviously, it's a global effort. So fortunately, our member countries benefit from the global dialogue. They benefit from all the work and all the good work that is being done by the other MDB, especially, you know, the lead taken by institutions like the World Bank. And and we know that by actually encouraging this and embedding this into the operations within our member countries, we would be able to basically go out to the market and raise much more money that they desperately need for their infrastructure development, given, as I said earlier, given the lack of or their own fiscal capacity. And this is very important, that this is the message that we are trying to get out to the member countries, that given the fiscal capacity or lack of capacity that you have, the only way that you can actually get to the targets that you have for infrastructure development is basically bringing private capital in, and private capital will not come in unless and until you are able to show that you are on the path and the road to basically embracing not just climate change, not just ESG framework, but the whole sustainability. And that should basically be the key message that goes out from an institution like ourselves as an MDB, as a responsible institution serving the member countries, so that they in turn are able to basically get the help that they require. Now, the climate change work pillars. I mean, we have said a lot of things, but I want to really go in terms of how we approach this. Now, we have a stepwise process that we have in engagement with individual countries, what we call the country planning or the member country partnership strategy. And then we basically have a 3 to 5 year horizon in which we basically plan our intervention with that specific country. So that is basically the first stage of our engagement with the country. We identify their needs, we identify as to the sectors that we will engage in, and that becomes the document which guides us over the next 3 to 5 years for that specific country. Then within that country strategy, we basically identify projects in the project preparation and so on. And those are the steps where basically we start bringing in the policy documents, the policy framework of Islamic Development Bank into the projects and into the actual intervention. And obviously, we have a very strong mechanism of monitoring, not just through the implementation period, but also post-implementation. We have a very strong evaluation team which basically goes out there and sees what were the results that were achieved, or which were basically set as the targets within the appraisal and at the time of the design, and whether those results were achieved, and if not, what more could be done in the design of future projects that we would basically be looking at. So this is something that we have put in place, and I think now just to give you an idea that we have about a split of about 75% of our work is on the public procurement side. So we work with the countries, and this is basically where their fiscal budgets come into play. And about 25% is on the non-sovereign, or let's say the PPPs side, which is Again, the reason I bring in the distinction is because when we are basically dealing with the public sector procurement, we have to deal really as an institution directly with the government and the ministries and the agencies in terms of what they need to embrace and why is it important. And so this is a one-on-one dialogue. When we go in and when we do the non-sovereign or the PPP infrastructure finance, there it becomes a 3 or a 4-way dialogue, because we are discussing not just with the sponsors, the promoters, the concessionaires of the PPP assets, but also with the government, the other financiers. So basically, there is a common dialogue that happens, and obviously the non-sovereign or the PPP financing takes on a very different meaning in terms of the engagement from the financiers as compared to a bilateral what do you call public procurement financing. So this is just to give you an overview in terms of how we basically are approaching these things. Now, what we have is a target. We have set a target that we would basically make sure the climate finance target of lending is roughly we achieve a target of 35% by 2025. And I think earlier I had heard maybe EBRD was talking about a 50% target. And I think this goes to show the diversity in the profile of the member countries of our respective institutions. And we have to, as I said, this is very important, that we cannot obviously adapt a universal or a global standard. We have to basically make sure that whatever standard that we adapt is conforms and it is realistic in terms of our expectations vis-a-vis the member countries. Now, and we feel that if we are able to achieve 35% by 2025, then the only way that the only direction for us would be basically increasing this more and more. Now, obviously, now what we have to basically do is that ISDB support in its member countries, the trade-offs. The trade-offs are very important. That you have, yes, overall economic growth, and you have the green growth. And again, the reason for us it is very important that we do not want to, yes, while the global dialogue is very important and we are part of that global dialogue, the member countries are much more important to us because they are the ones that we are serving. So basically, alignment with the Paris, alignment framework, that is there. So I'm not going to spend much time on that. Now the challenges are really, I mean, I just want to conclude quickly. The challenges for us are the lack of awareness among our stakeholders. This is the biggest challenge. It's a very, very let's say a process that we have to follow, and we know that it will take time, it will take a lot of effort, but nevertheless, it's something that we have to overcome. Lack of capacity and knowledge on what to do and how to do it within our member countries, lack of buy-in by the governments, the political will, these are all issues that we have to deal with. Lack of availability of finance, which is very, very critical. But there is no, I mean, for some of our member countries, other than finance coming from development partners, there is no other money for them to basically for their economic development needs. So that is basically something that we realize. What do we need to do? As I said, raise awareness and publicity, build and enhance capacity. These are some of the things that we basically can continue to work on, and obviously, as you can very well imagine, that this is a journey that we have undertaken and we are continuing, and I don't think there is a time limit or a defined time for us as to when we will reach our destination. This will be an ongoing process, and I think this is something that we are prepared to do as an institution, which basically reports to, belongs to, and works for the benefit of the member countries. So with that, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity. I mean, it's really pleasure in obviously listening to all the colleagues, and obviously giving us the opportunity to at least share some of the challenges that we are facing and our views. Thank you so much, and I give the floor back to you, Eric.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. That was an excellent presentation, and it's good to see an overview of Islamic Development Bank and how the Islamic Development Bank is committed to the SDGs, which is very important because as the bank has embraced the SDGs, this when your outreach to your member countries, you're advocating the SDGs as well, which is very important. And then also thank you so much for sharing the sustainable finance framework, mainstreaming climate action in bank operations, as well as the implementation framework, which is all very important for the countries that you're serving. So with that, we can now move to Q&A. And I want to thank every panelist. My humble thanks to all of you for taking the time out to join today. Now, for the Q&A, I would like to see if any of the countries that are in Xiefei's sessions would like to ask a question first before we take other questions. Now, there's a number of questions here, but I wanted to check with the countries that presented today. So are there any questions coming from Philippines, Bangladesh, Kyrgyz Republic, and Mongolia? I am seeing that in the chat that countries are sort of doing their individual outreach, so I'll leave it at that. So among questions for the panelists, the first question that I let me see here, I have to jot it down, was how does one raise awareness on green finance? Would anybody like to pick that one up from our panel?
Well, Eric, just to get the conversation going, this is Indrajit speaking.
Okay, gotcha.
The Central Bank of Sri Lanka went through the whole process of producing a roadmap for green financing. And one of the primary motivations was to raise awareness. And I think it taught us a few lessons. One, in terms of raising awareness amongst the public sector and in the government structures, trying to mainstream sustainability into the planning and budgeting processes. That actually does then raise some of these issues really at a pretty fundamental level. Everybody needs money, and when they have to make their bids for their allocations from the government budget, if these issues can then be mainstreamed into that process, then I think that's one way that you get the whole system tuned in to some of these issues, and one can get the messages across regarding green financing through that process. That's one. The second thing is, financial institutions, financial intermediation is the lifeblood of the economy. So raising awareness amongst all segments of the financial and capital market sector, not only then infuses sustainability into the financial intermediation process, but also through those institutions you can reach their client base. And the third layer is there are a number of civil society organizations which are very active in this area on sustainability issues. And one can have outreach into their grassroots links through engaging them. So you need to operate at different levels, and the media. I think there is a benefit to be gained by taking time to interact with the media and to make them aware of some of the issues involved in terms of sustainability and green financing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Indrajit. Anyone else want to jump in on that question, or anyone from the Xiefei's session like to ask a question before we? There's like 3 or 4 questions here, so if not, I will move to. There's a question here from Mahran. He is asking. This question is directed to Francis. And is climate change included in your social risk management? Francis?
I would say that the climate is for us is still mostly classified as environmental risks. However, if you're talking about like linking social risk together with climate risk, that does make sense, because climate risk could bring some social instability if when that comes to like climate can influence people's household income or just realistic mortgages, etc. However, sometimes when like us bankers are doing our like modeling risks, some issues like that, we'll just take that into consideration. But we normally classify as environmental risk. There's some overlap between environmental, climate, and social, or with traditional credit risk analysis. But I would say that they're related. They're related, but sometimes we just don't take it out separately and say climate risk is social risk, but they're definitely related. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Francis. So let's the next question here I see is from Ms. Sara Hadavan, and she's from the Ministry of Road, Urban Development, Islamic Republic of Iran. She has two questions, and the print's quite big, so let me see if I can see the whole question here. The first question is, considering that the private sector in particular faces more risks in projects than the public sector, which was also mentioned in the presentation, such as tariff reform risk or demand risk or capital investment, how the private sector has addressed key risk in PPP projects to make most profit. So I throw that out to all our panelists. If anyone wants to jump in, please.
I'll take this one, Eric, if
Okay.
with your permission.
Oh, of course, Mohammed.
Yeah, I think that you see the risk is the same. It's basically the government basically is prepared to take the risk because it has no other option, and it has deeper pockets. So if there is a loss of revenue or projected traffic, or let's say a slower than expected increase in demand, both the private sector and the public sector would basically be exposed to that. It just happens that the public sector asset, when we finance, the government steps up and the government takes the whole risk, and the government is prepared to basically use its fiscal capacity in order to, in order to support the let's say the reduced demand or the reduced growth rate. When a private sector comes in, unfortunately, they do not have that luxury. So therefore, they have to make sure, and especially the private sector has to make sure that the returns, the minimum returns can be assured. So therefore, they look for a certain assurances. I would not like to call them guarantees, but certain assurances and risk mitigation when we are looking at the revenue model. So so this is how we basically try to address. If you are able to address the demand or the revenue side, then the private sector is basically assured that they would be able to get a minimum return on the capital and on the risk that they are taking. So this is a key difference. Now, I just want to make sure that we all recognize that the risk of an asset is the same. It just depends on who's prepared to take what kind of risk and what is done. There's certain infrastructure that is basically a public good and a public need that has to be supported by the government. So therefore, whether it is economically or financially viable is something becomes a moot point. Yes, you need to appraise the project even for a public sector asset that it should be economically viable. But whether it turns out to be economically viable or not, that is a secondary issue. And the government has to basically absorb that risk. So that's basically my take on that. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Mohammed. And now for the second question here, also from the Islamic Republic of Iran. This one is about delivery models. And these delivery models were discussed in the presentation, such as BLT and build, operate, transfer. Is there a study that has compared other models, such as BF, DBFM, etc., from different dimensions, such as reducing risk for the parties or increasing profits? Anyone from the session, please take up the question. It's also in the chats. If you want to read it again, it's in the chat box. If you click the chat option, you can see the question there. Okay, I don't want to pinpoint anyone, but does anyone want to take a small crack at that question?
I personally am not aware of a study that has been done, but obviously just by the very definition of these various forms of private sector engagement, it is really how the responsibility is basically being shifted. But just one thing that I would like to point out is that irrespective of the responsibility that is being passed on to the private sector, we should all keep in mind that that responsibility or obligation is always priced. It is priced, and the cost is ultimately paid by the government or the public, because it is not that a model basically will bring in a lesser risk or a higher risk. You can have the private sector comes in and it has its own idea as to what is the minimum risk that is acceptable to them, and obviously the risk return reward, the reward that they establish for themselves. You can have a private sector coming in for a transport project in one country with an IRR expectation of 12%, and the same private sector promoter can go to another country with an IRR expectation of only 8 to 9%. So again, it depends on the perceived risk, and but at the same time, if we basically everything else being equal, the design, they always would have the cost embedded in it, and you will basically add the cost to whichever mode of partnership that you choose. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. So I see they're about to release the hounds, so that means we're going to be all chased out of here soon. So I would like to wrap this up. I'm sorry we can't take any more questions due to time. And I'd like to once again thank every one of you, of the panelists of this excellent session, for taking the time out from your parts of the world to join and to impart your knowledge with us. And with that, I would like to pass the floor back to Daniel. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Eric, and to all the presenters for sharing your valuable insights and views for this very special session. I would like to thank everyone for your time. Just to mention, we're grateful for the questions we've been receiving, that we warmly welcome further questions or requests for referrals to other participants by sending us an email at escap-infrappppnet.org, and the email will be shared in the chat box as well. It's also the same email where you receive your meeting link from. This will be shared in the chat box right now by Baini. Thank you so much. So to wrap up, we will now move to the closing session, and I'd like to welcome Dr. Tak-Yun Kim, Deputy Director of the Division of PPPs from PMAC at KDI, to deliver his closing remarks. Dr. Kim, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniel, for introduction. First of all, I am happy to give a closing remark at this virtual meeting. As we come to close on the 6th meeting of infrastructure financing and the PPP network of Asia and Pacific, first and foremost, I'd like to thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend this meeting and helping to make it such a successful event. Also, I'd like to express my appreciation to the presenters and moderators for their valuable contributions to this meeting. The first session presented investment project to potential investors to improve bankability and sustainability of their infrastructure proposals. And in the second session, we learned about Korea's experience in PPPs with a special focus on the transportation and education sectors. as well as some financial issues and government responses. In the third session, several challenges were addressed about accessing private financing and also about greener infrastructure proposals that attract the growing sector of green finance and effort at becoming more bankable. Lastly, in the final session, the development of the sustainability and resilience criteria for infrastructure and PPP project was introduced. Yeah. In addition, there are a number of specific and important questions raised during each of the sessions, which were very thoughtful and interactive. As a result, I hope that we have taken a step closer to accelerating the application of PPPs and SDG investment. Through our shared experience and expertise, I hope this meeting has served as a platform for regional networking, allowing us to discuss broader set of issues related to financing infrastructure for sustainable and inclusive development. Finally, before concluding my remarks, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to all the members, including ESCAP and China PPP Center, who have made invaluable contributions in preparing and running this event so smoothly. I look forward to maintaining this vibrant and constructive network that is emerged as a result of this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kim. Now I'd like to welcome Dr. Tianti Sahanik to close the sixth meeting. Dr. Tianti, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Daniel, and thank you very much, Dr. Takyun Kim, Deputy Director, Division PMAT Korea Development Institute, Republic of Korea. It must be quite late for you now in Korea, and thank you very much for staying on until the closing remarks, and thank you for your excellent summary of the meeting. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have come to the end of this quite long but very fruitful meeting. Actually, in a normal setting, when we meet physically, we would have actually at least 1 to 2 days meeting. Unfortunately, with COVID-19, we can only meet virtually, and a virtual meeting is probably not good to extend for too long. So although the conversation, of course, will continue after this meeting, I encourage you to get in touch with each other, get in touch with us, in order to ask any questions or contribute or exchange views after the meeting, and the email is already posted there. If you want to reach out to anyone, also let us know. I'm also very glad to hear all the interesting projects from countries today and with all the useful insights from private sector. As I mentioned earlier, ESCAP will continue to be providing increasing support for the PPP unit members of our network to attract financing for the sustainable infrastructure projects. And with this in mind, I hope that we have achieved more or less that objective in today's SDG Infrastructure Investment Fair. Today we have heard projects from country members such as Philippines, Bangladesh, Kyrgyzstan, Mongolia, and we hope it will help make this project a reality and help our other members in developing and presenting their own project proposals. We have then had the privilege of learning about experiences of Korea, one of the world leaders in PPP. Following this, we will receive practical views from distinguished experts in how country members of our network can seek to attract better the growing pool of green finance. Ladies and gentlemen, as this meeting is coming to a close and as we approach a new year, I can't believe that 1 year has passed so quickly. And now approaching again another year, I would like to ask our members to engage in our team more closely to help us in continuing to support you. I would like to ask the PPP unit and country members of the network to encourage you to upload your project pipelines onto the Infra web portal so that we can help your projects find interested investors. For the private sector members of the network, I would like to encourage you to engage with any projects from our countries presented here today, or the projects in the Infonet web portal. Our team will be happy to assist you in any engagement in connecting you with each other. And to all the members, I would encourage you to continue to share information about the network and its activities with your professional networks, so that they too can take advantage of this platform to bring together and foster knowledge sharing among public and private sectors. As a way forward, I also would like to inform you, we didn't have time to talk about this in this meeting because of the limited time. I'd like to inform you that ESCAP has recently developed sustainable and resilient infrastructure guideline for project uploading to our web portal and for information and knowledge sharing among network members. We believe that to mobilize public and private capital at scale for sustainable infrastructure, we first need a clear understanding of what constitutes a sustainable asset and clear guidance to be considered in the planning, design, procurement, executing, operation, and decommissioning phases. Therefore, ESCAP has developed this guideline with the belief that effective use of such guideline is likely to provide greater access to both traditional and new official financing, as well as private financing that increasingly requires sustainability commitment in project preparation. With this in mind, you will hear from us, all the PPP unit member of the network, you hear from us about this draft guideline in coming week, and we look forward to hearing back from you about your feedback and comments. And in order for us to support you in preparing and initiating better projects and making long-lasting change towards more sustainable pipelines of infrastructure projects. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that going to the new year, we'll be in touch more closely to make this network works for everyone. And with this, I would like to thank your continued participation. I thank the presenters who kindly shared their time and expertise with us today. And thank you to Korea Development Institute and China Public-Private Partnership Center for co-hosting this important year-end event. I look forward to seeing you all again next year, which is not long. It's just less than a month. It will be next year. So I look forward to seeing you again in Q1 at our thematic workshop, or probably even before. And with that, I'd like to say thank you and goodbye, and until we meet again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tian Tip, and to all the distinguished participants for taking part in today's 6th meeting of the network. All materials will be uploaded onto the ESCAP website in the following week. Meanwhile, we really appreciate your feedback on this meeting. If you can help us simply by scanning this QR code on the screen right now to take a very short survey. This will help us very much for upcoming events. So once again, I'd like to reiterate our sincere gratitude to PMAC, to CPPC for the strong and continuous collaboration to make this event possible. We are pleased that our partnership has gone from strength to strength. I would also like to thank my colleagues, Ms. Beni Liu, Mr. Alex Kolvalenko, Kun Prani, who many of you have been in communication with for their efforts and preparation for this meeting. And my appreciation also to Mr. Eric Reuter and Mr. David Bonnier for the overall support and guidance. Thank you very much. So with this, I wish everybody good health, and we look forward to seeing you all again in our next network event. Until then, happy holidays, and have a very happy new year. Thank you very much, and take care.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Happy holiday.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Happy holiday. Bye-bye. Thank you.